For years ago, when I was working 3 12-hour night shifts every week at a regional hospital outside Pittsburgh, I had only been a registered nurse for about 8 months, and I was still getting used to the overnight routine. Most nights were predictable. Around midnight, we'd finish medication rounds, chart our notes, and try to catch up on paperwork before the next wave of call lights. Clipped to my scrub top was my laminated hospital ID badge. I touched it almost unconsciously every time I walked through a secured door. It had become part of my routine, like checking a patient's wristband before giving medication. That Thursday started like any other. Around 1:15 a.m., I was pushing a medication cart toward the east wing when I noticed a nurse I'd never seen before. She looked completely ordinary. Mid-30s, dark hair tied into a bun, navy scrubs identical to ours, hospital badge, comfortable walking shoes. She was reviewing a clipboard while walking, exactly like every other nurse on the floor. As we passed, she gave me a polite smile. "Busy night?" I nodded. "Always." She kept walking. Nothing about the interaction felt unusual. About 20 minutes later, one of my coworkers, Melissa, asked if I'd met the new float nurse. "I guess so," I said. "Dark hair? East wing." Melissa frowned. "I've worked every shift this week. Nobody told me we were getting a float." We shrugged it off. Hospitals constantly shuffled staff between departments. It wasn't unusual. Around 2:30 a.m., I entered room 218 to check on an elderly patient recovering from hip surgery. She looked nervous. Before I could ask what was wrong, she grabbed my wrist. "The other nurse. What about her?" "She came in here." I checked the medication chart. No medications were due. "What did she do?" The patient hesitated. "Nothing. She just stood beside my bed." "For how long?" "I don't know, maybe a minute. Then she walked out." I assumed the patient had been half asleep. Still, I documented the conversation, just in case. At exactly 3 a.m., I saw the same nurse again. She was coming out of the intensive care hallway. That's when something finally struck me as odd. She wasn't carrying anything. No medication scanner. No patient chart. No portable computer. Every nurse carried at least one of those. She noticed me looking, smiled again, then disappeared through a staff-only door that required badge access. A few minutes later, my phone rang. "Security. Can you come to the nurse's station?" When I arrived, 2 security officers were waiting with our charge nurse. One officer held up a printed image from a surveillance camera. It was the woman I'd seen twice. "Have you seen her tonight?" "Yeah. She went through the east hallway." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "Can you point out where?" I showed them. Then I asked the obvious question. "What's going on?" The older officer sighed. "We've had reports of someone impersonating medical staff." I laughed nervously. "You mean wearing scrubs?" He nodded. "Stolen scrubs. Fake badge." My stomach tightened. She spoke to me. So did several others. The charge nurse immediately checked the staffing roster. No one recognized the woman's face. HR confirmed there wasn't a current employee matching her description. Security locked down several access points while officers searched the building. For almost 40 minutes, nothing happened. Then housekeeping called. Someone had been seen entering an unused patient room at the end of the west corridor. Security responded immediately. A few of us watched from behind the nurse's station. Minutes later, one officer radioed something I couldn't hear. Then everyone started running. The woman burst out of a side hallway. She wasn't running wildly. She moved with purpose, weaving through equipment carts like she'd memorized the floor plan. One security officer nearly caught her before she pushed through an emergency exit. The alarm finally sounded. By the time officers reached the parking lot, she was gone. Police searched the surrounding area until sunrise. They never found her. A week later, detectives came back with more information. Several hospitals across 2 neighboring counties had reported seeing the same woman over the previous 6 months. Always in scrubs, always wearing a convincing ID badge. She never stole medication, never assaulted anyone, never demanded money. As far as investigators could tell, she simply walked through hospitals pretending she belonged there before disappearing. No one ever identified her. I still work night shifts. I still instinctively glance at every employee's ID badge when we pass in the hallway. Mine, the same laminated hospital ID badge I wore that night, has a long crack running across the plastic from years of use. I almost replaced it once. Then I decided to keep it, because every time I clip it onto my scrubs, I remember something one of the detectives told us before he left. The dangerous people aren't always the ones who stand out. They're the ones everyone assumes belong. I was working as a patient care technician at a hospital in Kentucky. I'd been on the night shift for almost 3 years and knew our medical floor better than my own apartment. One thing I always carried was a master key card issued to our unit. It opened supply rooms, medication storage areas, and certain patient rooms during emergencies. Staff were constantly reminded never to leave one unattended. For almost a week, patients had been making odd complaints during morning rounds. I woke up and my door was open. I thought someone came into my room. I heard footsteps, but nobody answered. Most of us assumed sleepy patients were confusing dreams with reality. Then it happened to me. At exactly 3 a.m., I was updating charts at the nurse's station when I heard the first electronic lock release. Click. I looked toward room 304. The door slowly drifted open. A few seconds later, room 306, then 308, then 310. Every occupied room on our hallway, one after another. No one walked between them. No one was visible. Melissa, the charge nurse, looked up from her computer. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. We both stepped into the hallway. Every door now stood slightly open, just enough to create a narrow black gap. We checked each patient. Most were asleep. A few thought we had opened their doors. None of us had. Maintenance inspected the electronic locks the following morning. Every one passed inspection. They blamed a software glitch. The next night, we paid closer attention. At 2:55 a.m., Melissa positioned herself near one end of the hallway while I waited at the other. Security watched the cameras. At exactly 3 o'clock, click, room 304 unlocked. Then 306. Then 308. Again, the same sequence. Melissa ran toward the first room while I sprinted toward the last. We crossed paths halfway down the corridor. Nobody. Security reviewed the footage. According to the cameras, the hallway had been empty. That explanation made no sense. Patient rooms couldn't unlock themselves. 2 nights later, another clue appeared. An elderly man recovering from pneumonia stopped me during rounds. "Someone checked my wristband." "What do you mean?" He shined a little flashlight on it. I checked the electronic medication log. No one had scanned his identification bracelet overnight. His chart showed no scheduled care at that hour. He insisted someone had quietly entered his room while he slept. Then another patient reported the same thing. Then another. Always around 3 in the morning. Administration asked us not to discuss the incidents with patients until maintenance finished its investigation. That didn't stop the rumors. Some staff thought someone had hacked the door system. Others suspected an employee pulling some kind of prank. Neither explanation fit. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. Every unlocked room belonged to patients who couldn't easily leave their beds. Post-surgical patients, stroke patients, patients on oxygen. Never the empty rooms, never the isolation rooms, only occupied rooms with vulnerable people inside. That realization changed everything. The following Friday, I volunteered to stay hidden inside an unused supply closet across from room 312. The closet door had a narrow gap that overlooked the hallway. At 2:58 a.m., the lights dimmed automatically into overnight mode. The corridor became almost silent. At exactly 3 o'clock, the first lock clicked, then another. Instead of watching the doors, I watched the far end of the hallway. A man wearing dark maintenance coveralls stepped out from an emergency stairwell. He wasn't carrying tools. He held what looked like a small electronic card programmer. He walked calmly from door to door. He never entered the rooms. He simply held the device near each electronic lock for a second before moving on. When he reached room 312, I quietly opened the closet door behind him. Hospital security. It was the first thing that came into my head. The man turned. For a split second, he looked genuinely surprised. Then he bolted. I chased him down the hallway while yelling for help. Melissa stepped out from a patient room, just in time to see him sprint toward the stairwell. He shoved through the heavy door and disappeared downstairs. Security officers reached the exit less than a minute later. The stairwell was empty. Outside, police found a maintenance van parked behind the hospital. Its engine was still warm. The license plates had been stolen from another vehicle. Inside the van, investigators recovered duplicate uniforms, electronic lock programming equipment, and photocopies of several hospital floor plans. The suspect was never identified. Detectives believed he had studied multiple hospitals by posing as a contractor before learning how to bypass older electronic locking systems. No one could explain why he targeted occupied patient rooms. Hospital administrators upgraded every electronic lock within a month. We all received new master key cards, and security procedures changed overnight. I kept my old card after it was deactivated. It's tucked inside a drawer at home. Every time I see it, I remember standing in that supply closet, listening to one door after another unlock in perfect order. Investigators eventually proved someone had been opening those rooms. The one thing they never discovered was what he planned to do if one of those patients had been awake when he finally decided to walk inside.
5 years ago, I worked overnight as a patient transporter at a regional hospital in Tennessee. My job was simple on paper. Move patients between departments, return equipment to storage, and keep the hallways clear before the morning staff arrived. At the end of every shift, all unused wheelchairs were lined up against the wall outside the rehabilitation department. There were 12 of them. Every night. Always in the same order. One thing I always carried was a small brass locker key attached to my belt. It opened the equipment room where the spare wheelchairs were stored. I checked that key dozens of times every shift without thinking about it. The first strange morning happened after a particularly quiet night. As I walked toward the rehab hallway, I stopped. Only 11 wheelchairs were lined up. The missing one was sitting outside room 417, nearly 50 yards away. Nobody could explain how it got there. The patient inside hadn't walked since surgery. The nurses assumed another transporter had forgotten to return it. I accepted that explanation. Until it happened again. The next night a different wheelchair disappeared. This time it was parked outside room 403. Again. The patient hadn't left the room. Again. No nurse admitted moving it. Again. Nobody seemed overly concerned. Hospitals were busy places. Equipment ended up everywhere. But I started paying attention. Before going on break, I lined all 12 wheelchairs perfectly against the wall. I even took a picture with my phone. 12 chairs. Side by side. At exactly 2:40 a.m., I returned. There were only 11. I immediately walked the hallway. The missing wheelchair was sitting outside room 409. Its footrests had been folded down, as if someone expected a patient to sit in it. I checked the room. An elderly woman was asleep. She hadn't pressed the call button. She hadn't left the bed. I wheeled the chair back. The next evening, I mentioned it to the charge nurse. She laughed. Maybe we've got a sleepwalking transporter. Everyone chuckled. I laughed too. But inside, something didn't feel right. 2 nights later, I decided to stay hidden. At 2:45 a.m., I switched off the lights inside an empty family waiting room across from the rehab hallway. From there, I could see every wheelchair. Nothing happened. 3 o'clock came and went. I felt ridiculous. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Then, a man pushed through the stairwell door. He wore dark blue hospital scrubs. No badge. No equipment. He walked straight toward the wheelchairs without looking around. He chose one. Quietly rolled it away. Not toward a patient room. Toward the old diagnostic imaging corridor that had been closed for renovations. I waited until he disappeared around the corner. Then I followed. The wheelchair tracks echoed softly across the polished floor. The farther I walked, the quieter the hospital became. The construction area was blocked by temporary plastic walls. The wheelchair sat alone outside them. The man was gone. I stepped closer. On the other side of the plastic barrier, I heard voices. Not hospital staff. Men. Whispering. One of them said, "Not this one." Another replied, "Tomorrow." My heart started racing. I backed away as quietly as I could. Then my radio clipped against the wall. The metallic click echoed through the corridor. The whispers stopped. Complete silence. Then someone started walking toward the plastic sheeting. Fast. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard the barrier rip open. Heavy footsteps followed. I shoved the wheelchair behind me into the hallway, blocking part of the corridor. It crashed sideways, slowing whoever was chasing me just enough. I reached the nurse's station out of breath. Security officers immediately searched the renovation wing. They found signs that someone had been entering through an exterior construction entrance that contractors had forgotten to secure. Hidden inside were sleeping bags, food containers, stolen hospital uniforms, and maps of patient floors. Whoever had been there escaped before police arrived. Investigators later believed a small group had been using the unfinished wing after hours. They couldn't prove why they kept moving wheelchairs through active patient areas. One detective had a theory. The wheelchairs weren't being stolen. They were being used to quietly transport equipment, or people, through the hospital without attracting attention. There wasn't enough evidence to confirm it. The construction entrance was sealed the next morning. New cameras were installed. Nothing like it ever happened again. I still work in healthcare. I still notice where every wheelchair is when I walk onto a hospital floor. That small brass locker key is still attached to my keyring. The equipment room it opened has since been remodeled, and the lock no longer exists. But every time I see that key, I remember the security footage detectives showed us a week later. It captured one wheelchair rolling out of the rehab hallway at exactly 2:58 a.m. The camera never showed who was pushing it. The wheelchair moved out of frame. Completely on its own. The investigators insisted someone had to be hidden in the camera's blind spot. They're probably right. But after watching that footage several times, none of us could explain why the wheelchair's shadow stretched across the floor before it entered the hallway.